And here we are. We are live at Facebook Live Ignatius Press. I'm Vivian Dudrow, an editor at Ignatius Press, and our guest today is Cheri Blomquist, author of Before Austen Comes Aesop. And Cheri, why don't you tell us briefly what Before Austen Comes Aesop is about?
First of all, thank you for having me. I'm really honored to be here. It is, first of all, a two-part book. And the first part is an annotated list of what I call the children's great books, which is kind of a parallel, I guess, if you will, of the Western canon known as the great books. It's my offering of the children's version of that. And the second half of the book is discusses ways to help children fully enjoy and appreciate these wonderful books, or any books really, through different methods like just leisure reading or scholarly study of them.
And give us a little bit about your background. What made you a book lover?
Well, I grew up an only child, at least till I was 13, and then I have a half sister. But until I was 13, it was just my mother and I. And so I had a lot of quiet in my house, and she was a book lover herself. She loved children's books, still does. She's 80 years old and she still reads children's literature, just loves it. And she just fed me book after book because I had limited access. I didn't have a good school library or anything. And so I just read whatever she gave me, and she introduced me to some of the best children's literature. And over the years, I just became an avid reader. I developed a love for writing my stories of my own. And middle school, I think, was a time when I really started to own my love for books, and that was in RIF days, which were called Reading is Fundamental. And we would go to a room, and there'd be books laid out on a table, and every student could choose one book off the table. And to me, it was like, a candy store. And I began to own my own choices. And then I became a bookseller when I became an adult. And I got to learn all kinds of new literature that I hadn't been exposed to before, and help other children feed their love of books, and help parents find books for their children. And so I just, that deepened my love for literature even more, and especially children's literature.
And then you studied English in college, right? And education as well.
Yes, I was going to be an elementary education major, and my professors finally said to me, "What are you doing? You should be an English teacher." So I thought, well, maybe they're right. So I went that direction, and I also have a major or a degree in Bible as well. So.
And the premise of your book is that children often dive into adult literature a little too prematurely before really enjoying and appreciating literature written just for them, or literature that, while maybe not written just for them, historically has been passed down to children. Why do you think that's important?
I'm sorry. The literature that
Why children should read children's literature before diving into adult literature too soon.
I'm sorry. Yes. I became very concerned about the number of literature programs that were introducing some of the major adult classics onto young teens in early high school before they were really grown out of some of the major children's classics. And I became very concerned because many of these programs had a lot of books that they would teach children in these programs. And I began to wonder what was the rush in me, because I, as an adult, would have struggled to examine that many books and get a lot out of them. And so that really bothered me. And so I also began to look for literature programs for my own children, and it was very confusing. Why this book and not that book? And in 2014, I read a history of children's literature by Seth Lair, and I got a new idea. It's like, wait a minute, maybe we push these major adult classics on children, but maybe it's because we don't know what the major classics for children are. We know that there's classics and we love a lot of them. There's so many. How do you know which is the best and why they're important? And so that his book sparked a new idea in me. What are the children's great books? What are the ones that are most important to children? And so I kind of went on a new journey. I was so curious for my own sake, and I wanted to share that with other people, to find out what were the most important, most influential books for children. So kind
And
of both of those things.
And so this list that you provide, as you explained, it's the first half of the book. Is this wonderful list, very thorough. It gives the age level, the maturity level, or rather reading level, and then it's in chronological order. Beginning with ancient times, what kinds of stories were told children, and why do you think it's important to put this in chronological order?
Well, children are children. It doesn't matter if you're born in ancient Greece or if you're born now. Children are children. They've always wanted stories and love stories, want to be entertained. And I began to wonder what were important to children back then. They must have had stories too, even before there was a children's literature market. And so I wanted to show the whole scope of children's literature, what children have read from ancient times all the way up to modern times. And I felt that doing it chronologically and giving a general history of literature would help people see how literature developed and what was important in the lives of children, how each book builds upon the other, which is just the same as the great books of Western adult literature do too. And all the ideas build upon each other over time. And I wanted to see that in children's literature. I learned a lot. And one thing is that a lot of children's literature was actually adult literature for centuries, such as the Iliad and the Odyssey. These were embraced by children. So I just wanted to show the whole scope of that, just like we can get in the Western adult great books.
And there's then a shared culture, right? That Western culture, your book focuses on the works that have been great through time in Western culture, both contributing to it and being influenced by it. And for us to even understand ourselves, our own civilization, it's kind of important to see these works through time, isn't it?
Yes, for sure. And it's important to understand where we've been and who we are. And that doesn't come just through history. We can study all the battles and dates that we want, but there's a human story that's being told and it's played out in literature. We can see how people lived, how they interacted, how they spoke, what their ideas were. We can examine our vices and our virtues and our successes and our failures. We can look ourselves square in the eye when we study literature. And that goes for children's literature as well, not just adult literature. It's all treasures of Western civilization. It's all art. And I feel that that's important to examine, that children's literature is no less art than adult literature.
Very good. Now, you use the word great, the canon of great books for adults, and you've developed a canon of great books for children. And so what are the criteria you use for deciding what deserves to be in the canon? What deserves to be on the list of great works?
Well, first of all, I made the list as objective as I could. It's very important to be objective and not just insert my own values, my own opinions, because I'm as opinionated as everyone else, and I didn't want myself to be in the list. So I tried to follow my research as best I could, and I tried to just let history reveal itself to me in what was the most influential, most impactful literature in the lives of children throughout history. So first of all, the list had to be as objective as I could make it. I did make judgment calls because I had to, but only when I had to. But I did try to parallel the Western adult great books by focusing on what was the most important and influential, not just in the lives of children, but also in the development of literary history, the development of children's literature. Just because of the way new authors, they build upon the ideas of the old. For example, Robinson Crusoe was the first island story, And that set off a whole new subgenre of island stories, castaway stories. And so I wanted to,
including Gilligan's Island.
well, yes, exactly. Yes, I mean, it shows up in pop culture. The books we have today don't come they didn't arise from a vacuum. They're built on the ideas that came before them. And I read many articles about how this author was influenced by that author, and when they wrote their books, they were inspired by certain authors. And so, and I've been inspired by authors as well. I was inspired by Seth Lair's History of Children's Literature. So I think that's important to have as a criteria to see how the whole scope, how it developed, just the way the great books of adult literature did. So I tried to follow that scope, and not what we think of as good or fun or appropriate, but what actually was important and influential throughout history.
Now, you mentioned having to make some value judgments, and I'm sure a lot of parents will be glad that you did, because when we get to 20th century literature, especially and late 20th century as well, we start to see some, I don't know, maybe problematic elements as creeping into children's literature. Yes. And you do use this category or this label, parents cautioned, in your book on certain titles. How would you like to explain a little bit about what your parents cautioned label means and how you hope parents will use that?
Well, again, first of all, this is meant to be as objective a list as I can make it. And because many books, maybe most books, I'm not sure, were written by non-Christian or maybe nominally Christian authors, then it's that their books don't necessarily match Christian Catholic values. And because I am not here to recommend books, it's not that the list isn't meant to be a set of recommendations, but an objective list to help parents make informed decisions of their own for the books that are appropriate for their children. And so when I got to books that history revealed to me, if you will, belonged on the list, and that they were impactful and influential in the lives of children or in the development of children's literature, then if I knew that had some mature material in it, such as a lot of violence or swearing, for example, well, Robinson Crusoe in itself has some violence. I don't think that was one of them as parents' caution, but I happen to be reading it right now. But it's, there's some mature material in a lot of these books, and I want parents to be aware of that before they just hand them to their children. Oh, this must be all right because it's on the list. In some cases, some of the content's actually pretty problematic, such as Catcher in the Rye has a lot of swearing. So I felt it's important to label the book so that parents could be on the alert, maybe look a little deeper at the book before they decide to read it with their children or hand it to their children. So
I think it's also helpful that, say your children is in school and is being assigned certain books and bringing them home. And, a lot of parents, they don't have time to read everything their children are reading, right? But I think your book is a handy guide to, well, let's just see, does that have a parent's caution label? And maybe find out why. And then just discerning, how are we going to handle this material in our home, if it's an assignment and so. And now you've got the ability to talk and learn alongside your children about things going on in the culture and going to affect them whether they read these books or not, right?
Yes, in some cases, I don't say that the student shouldn't read it or the child shouldn't read it. Maybe wait for a little bit till they're older. But if a parent feels that this is an important book, I suggest they read it with their student. And that's not hard to do because we're so busy. I mean, I would love to read a bunch of books with my son, who I homeschool, but it's hard to find the time, isn't it? But when you can, if you can, some of these books are actually, that are difficult or maybe don't match Catholic values, are actually very profound and beautiful, important books, but they have some problematic content. This, rather than just throw out the book, spend some time reading it with your student or child if you possibly can, because they're still worth examining and considering because of other traits that they have. So,
Well, and back to your point, these books kind of wouldn't be on the list and withstanding the tests of time if they didn't have something important about them.
well, exactly. Yes. There's a reason that classics are classics. And I used to
Right.
think like a lot of other people, like they're just boring, musty. They don't mean anything. They're outdated. They're not relevant. Well, they're classics because they're relevant.
Right.
They stand the test of time. And they were once contemporary too. We have to remember that all classics were once contemporary. They were criticized, they were banned, they were ignored, or they were popular or not popular, just like contemporary books. And someday some of the books we got now that are being published today will be classics. So
Right. That's right. That's right. The best children's books are really books that parents love as well, that adults love as well, right? I mean,
I think so.
as you point out, the early works on this list predate the children's book publishing business, right? Things like the Bible and the Iliad and
Right.
mythology and even Aesop's fables, which you mentioned in your title.
Mm-hmm.
These were not published works. These were orally transmitted stories
Right.
that were part of what everyone in the community listened to at the hearth or around the fire, or around, after dinner or what have you. These cultures preserved these stories and passed them on to their children too. They didn't differentiate between children's literature
Right.
and adult literature.
Yep.
This is our community's stories.
Right. And children could relate to them because of, they were just good stories, and sure, maybe they didn't understand them at the same level, but they could still enjoy them.
Right. And now there are, of course, because of the publishing industry, there's multiple children's adaptations of some of these things. Take the Odyssey, the Iliad, right? There's children. So, because those are really violent, and there's all kinds of adult content in those stories.
Cyclops.
Yeah, and not to mention all the snishing going on with goddesses and whatnot. So, I mean, these are not children's stories, right? I mean, this category of children's stories is somewhat a new phenomenon as a result of the publishing industry.
Yeah. And I almost wonder if it's false in some way. I mean, sure, Goodnight Moon is for children, for little, toddlers, but I like Goodnight Moon. I
do too.
I'm not going to go to the library and check out Goodnight Moon, but that's only because I've read it 100 times, my own kids. It's still worth reading. I mean, it's lovely. Tale of Peter Rabbit. I don't want to, if I had never had Tale of Peter Rabbit in my childhood, I still think it's worth reading, even though I'm an adult now. Art is art. It doesn't matter who it's published for. Art is art, and that doesn't matter if it's adults or children or whatever. We can still enjoy art for what it is. We just get to enjoy it on a higher level, maybe, if it was, speaks more to children.
And that's one of the unique things about your book, is that you dive into these children's classics like Goodnight Moon and so on, and you explain that even older children, if they never read that, they should before they graduate high school, even, and appreciate
study it, but they can certainly enjoy it and read it on a higher level than they would have if they were 3. It's still a great book.
That was really a unique thing about your book that caught my attention and others at Ignatius Press, that we thought made the book, really an interesting, worthwhile project that you've accomplished. Now, you've mentioned homeschooling, and certainly this book has, with its exhaustive lesson plans and helps like rubrics and things for grading and whatever. You could, as a homeschooler, make an entire literature curriculum out of your book, right?
If you like to do more independent study and you wanted to study certain books that maybe weren't in a literature program that you wanted to use, or you couldn't find it in a program, you can do it yourself. It's that doesn't mean that literature programs that are published with lesson plans aren't worthwhile. I'm absolutely not saying that, because sometimes a teacher and guided lessons are really helpful. But if you want to study a book independently, you can use the same principles that English teachers do. And so I've tried to lay those out clearly and succinctly so that you can make use of them in a way that's appropriate for you, that meets your needs and your students' needs. For example, how to write a literary analysis essay, how to annotate a work of literature, how to outline effectively. And those are all principles that English teachers use to develop curriculum, and you can do it too.
And by the way, they are study skills that if children learn these in literature, they cross over into other fields of study, right?
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
And because I use Mortimer Adler as my spine for developing the scholarly part of the book, I let him influence me from his classic How to Read a Book. And he covers all different genres in his How to Read a Book. I didn't go that deep into the different kind of the genres, but his basic principles apply to any kind of literature.
That's right.
Poetry is a little special and different, but you can use these principles for anything.
That's right.
Your whole life. It's good life skills. It's not just for academic literature class.
Exactly. That was exactly what I was thinking as I was working on the book, that, wow, if kids learn these study skills, they apply to any other subject they might
Yes.
want to learn.
And I wish I'd known some of them myself.
Likewise. So then, but then the book is not limited by any means to homeschoolers or people who are going to do an independent study literature course, because you also have lots of really great ideas for how to enjoy books at various levels, right?
Yes, I have also a leisurely plan that you can follow, and just reading for fun. But what about keeping a record in a reading notebook, or a book club, kind of a book club approach? Grab a partner and you read together, or maybe several partners, and have a party. Decorate your house with Winnie the Pooh theme if you're going to read Winnie the Pooh, and have a little British tea treats. Do something fun to make it come alive, and discuss it. Discuss the different ideas in the book. Discuss what happens, and make it fun. And then you can do the scholarly adventure, and you can do it at the elementary level or the secondary level. And there's so many ways to enjoy books. And so
Yes, and I think
offer.
I think you really do cover very broadly the various ways you can approach the study or the appreciation of literature, and at different age levels too. But really, the first half of the book, this exhaustive list that you give, the chronological order, the reading level, and all these things, I think that that's worth the price of the book myself.
Thank you.
But for those who actually want to apply some of your suggestions for how to read, appreciate, study literature, there's all that too. It's really like a 2-for-1.
Yeah, and originally I wasn't even going to include the second half. That came after I was finished with the annotated list, and I thought, this just doesn't feel like enough. How to help parents help their children get the most out of these books. And I'd long wanted to do, for years, I've wanted to write a book on Mortimer Adler's How to Read a Book and make it accessible to the homeschool world, because it's such a difficult book to just sit down and read. I struggled reading it. It's hard. It's a hard book to read. It's college level. And so I've long wanted to turn that into a guide, an accessible guide for parents. And so I added my own ideas, of course, to help unpack each level that he discusses in his book. But it is kind of like 2-for-1. But
it is. So let's go back for a minute, because I'm sure parents are eager about this topic. Some Catholics are very they're very protective about what their children should be reading, what their children should be exposed to. They want book lists that basically spell out what they should and shouldn't be reading.
yeah.
And that's not really what your book is doing, is it?
No, and I did that deliberately. I don't feel it's my place to insert my opinions, because my opinions may not line up with your opinions, even though we're both Catholics. That doesn't mean that we're going to always agree on what's appropriate. Let's use Harry Potter for an example. That's opening a can of worms, because some Catholics believe that's a good book to give their children, or a good series, and other Catholics believe it's wrong. And so I can't insert myself into each book and say this is good for you and this is not. And I feel like it's important to be objective so that parents can follow their own consciences and make their own informed decisions. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't, just because it's in a book, just don't hand it to your kid, but also read the summaries to make sure that it doesn't have, it's not about something that maybe your child isn't ready for. For example, The House on Mango Street was one of the first Chicana literature books, and maybe your student isn't ready for something like that might be in a couple of years. So make sure you're reading about the book too. But it's for you to make the decisions according to what you think is best for your child.
And every child is different, as you just alluded to, right? I mean, one child might be ready for certain kinds of content and another child at the same age is not. And really the person who knows the child best is the parent, right?
Right. Yep, I'm a strong believer that the parent is a primary educator, in whether you're homeschooling or not. And I know from my own 5 children that I have let a lot of what they have enjoyed in media and the arts slip away from me. And they're pretty good kids, but every once in a while I'm like, oh my goodness, I should have been more present and looked into what they were doing and been more guided them a little better. So it's easy to let it slip away. So definitely look more into the books, but hopefully my book will help you get a start and get a sense of whether this book is worth your time, whether it's worth your child's time, whether they're ready for it, reading level wise, interest level wise, and also the themes. So I do talk about some of the themes in each book, just to give you a sense of whether it's something that maybe you want to pursue. And it could also help your teens make informed choices on their own when you feel that they're ready.
Right. Don't you agree that by being kind of transparent about this process of discernment, that and helping your children, you're actually not only teaching them about literature, you're actually teaching them how to discern and make judgments about what they themselves are going to spend their time doing, and not just about books either, right?
Right. To me, when I was working at Barnes & Noble, I felt like I was in a microcosm of the whole world. I worked there for 5 years, and I loved the sense that I had the whole world around me, in every genre, in every book. And I had such a sense that this is the world, and I'd shelve all these books, and some of them were awful. They were about witchcraft and Satanism. Other books were about Winnie the Pooh, or you had everything. And I found myself needing to discern because of all the books that came my way and all the ones that interested me. And sometimes I have to put it back and like, this isn't for me. This isn't right for me. I know that this isn't good for me to read. And I learn the hard way sometimes, to be honest. But I think that is a really important life skill, to be able to learn to discern and know our Catholic faith so that we can make those decisions. And we do read something that isn't maybe healthy, then to have the strength to put it down, or to at least take it to someone and discuss it. I don't understand this. Why did this happen in this book? Why this, why is it so horrible? Help me understand this war, Mom. This is so horrible what happened in this war. Help me understand what happened to Anne Frank. Why did this happen to Anne Frank? That's one of the books on my list. I think that is really important.
And even if it is something that you find you're objecting to, isn't it important to know why you're objecting to it? And don't children have to learn over time how to be able to understand why are some things better than others? Why are some things evil? And isn't part of the process of learning that ability to make these kinds of evaluations, doesn't a lot of that come from reading literature?
Yes, I think that's one reason why literature is so important. And there was a time when I was like, why do we bother with literature? What's the point? And it took me some time of thinking about that, to realize that literature it gives us a window into life and into lives that we're not going to live, but it gives us windows so that we can understand humanity better, and so we can examine ourselves as human beings and look at different things that have happened throughout history for reading historical novels. And I just think it can give us so much insight to read literature. We see the Common Core, the Common Core curriculum that has been put into our schools, and it emphasizes nonfiction, and literature is being taken out, or else contemporary literature that is maybe adult. I remember one time at Barnes and Noble, I sold an entire class set of some dime store thriller that an English teacher was going to give to her students to read in class. I'm like, I didn't say anything because I was selling them, but I was just horrified because, why? There's so much else to read. But, it's just so important to read literature, and not just nonfiction, but to examine classics and just great books so that we can understand ourselves better as human beings.
Right. People are often surprised when you say, just because it's fiction doesn't mean it's not true.
That's right. And that took me a while to understand as well. Because, there was a time when a lot of Christians felt it was wrong to read fiction because it wasn't true. And I thought there was a time I thought, maybe they're right. And I thought, wait a minute, there is truth in it. It's just that, in fact, there are truths about humanity and about our world that can come through more eloquently, more clearly than they can in nonfiction. Nonfiction is important. There's some beautiful, wonderful nonfiction out there, but when it comes to fiction, we can examine ourselves in a different light, in a different way that we cannot in nonfiction.
That's right. And it gives us the opportunity to reflect on our lives, vicariously experiencing other people's experiences, which is what we do when we read a novel.
Right.
It helps us to reflect on our own lives.
Right.
And art can do this in ways that a lot of other things just can't.
So and I think that's true for all the arts, not just literature.
That's true for all the arts. That's right. So this is why it's in the category of the humanities, right?
That's right.
These are the things that we study in order to understand what it means to be human.
Yeah.
And so that's why what you've done in this book is a great service to parents, to be able to give us this list, to give us these explanations and summaries, then to show us how to read and write about what we read. And it's really just a great resource. And we thank you for bringing it to Ignatius Press.
Well, I'm really glad I could. Thank you so much for your support. Yep, and I hope that literature will make a comeback in schools and in education, because it's kind of falling away. I've seen it happen in just this past year. I've watched it happen, and I pray that we make a turnaround so that our children, the upcoming children, can continue to read great literature themselves.
And just to give a shout out, Cheri is also the author of an upcoming book from Ignatius Press, a vision book, a contribution to the vision book series on the life of Maria von Trapp, sort of novelized version of her story.
Fascinating story. They had a fascinating story, and so so excited to share it with people.
And so are we. So thanks, Cheri, and I'm sure we'll be talking about that book later.
Okay.